Assalamu alaikum and hello to my non-Muslim viewers. It's commonly said by atheist and Christian critics of Islam, or the Christian or atheist critics of Prophet Muhammad, that Prophet Muhammad plagiarized apocryphal or midrash stories from the Jews and Christians around him. So the stories of Abraham and Jesus and Solomon and uh, what else? The Queen Sheba, and all these stories not found in the Bible. The critics say the Prophet Muhammad plagiarized those stories off, apocryphal or midrash Jewish midrash stories, or Talmudic stories and stuff like that. So I'm going to be now. There's one serious problem with that accusation, that 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 conclusively proves that Prophet Muhammad didn't plagiarize any of these sources. And the serious problem is that a lot of these sources that the critics say the Prophet Muhammad plagiarized off of were in the languages of Hebrew, Syriac, Greek, Aramaic, and Ethiopian. So what's the problem with those sources being in those languages? The problem is that the Prophet Muhammad didn't know any of those languages. The Prophet Muhammad did not know Syriac. He didn't know Hebrew. He didn't know Greek. And he didn't know Aramaic. And he didn't know Ethiopian. He didn't know any of those languages. So, like, for example, they say the Prophet Muhammad plagiarized off the infancy gospel of Thomas. The problem is that the infancy gospel of Thomas was not available in Arabia. And the second problem is that the people who knew that story, if they were in Arabia, and that's a big if, because there's no evidence that that story traveled to Arabia from, Palestine, Syria, Egypt, and stuff like that. There's no evidence that the story went all the way to Arabia. But the issue here is that that story, or the infancy gospel of Thomas, was written in Greek or Syriac. It wasn't available in Arabic. And again, keep in mind that the Prophet Muhammad only knew Arabic. He didn't know Syriac. So, and then they'll say that the Prophet Muhammad plagiarized off the Alexander Romance, but the problem is the Alexander Romance was not available in Arabic. It was only available in Greek, Greek and Syriac, and it's been shown that the Alexander Romance actually postdates the Prophet Muhammad, or it came after the Prophet Muhammad died, or after the Quran chapter 18 was revealed. So the major issue here is that the Prophet Muhammad only knew Arabic, and this has been firmly established. Those so-called Jewish or Christian apocryphal sources, were not available in Arabic. They're available in Hebrew, Syriac, Greek, Aramaic, Ethiopian. So again, the Jews and Christians around the Prophet Muhammad were only speaking Hebrew and other languages. For example, the Quran chapter 16 verse 105 says that the Quran is revealed in Arabic, and that Christians in Arabia were speaking a different language than Arabic. Another issue is that when the Prophet Muhammad went to Medina and when he was around Jews, these Jews only knew Hebrew. They didn't know Arabic. So there was a problem with, there was a language barrier between the Prophet Muhammad and the Jews and Christians, because they didn't speak the same language. So again, this is further proof that the Prophet Muhammad didn't plagiarize, didn't orally hear the message and then plagiarize, or say that he's getting revelations when he's actually hearing those stories. This is further proof, because Prophet Muhammad didn't know the languages of the Christians around him, which was probably Syriac, and he didn't know Hebrew, which is what the Jews were speaking at that time. So again, and another problem is that there was no form of there was no Jewish midrash stories, or there was no Jewish Talmudic stories in Arabia circulating at that time, because a lot of those Talmudic stories actually postdate Islam. They don't date before Islam. They actually postdate Islam. And another issue is that a lot of those so-called Jewish midrash stories or Talmudic stories were written in Hebrew and things like that, not in Arabic. So this is further proof that the Prophet Muhammad didn't plagiarize off Jews and Christians of his time because he couldn't speak their languages, and there's no evidence that those stories were in Arabia. Uh, were in Arabia in the first place, and there's no evidence that those stories were translated from their original languages, such as Syriac, Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, Ethiopian into Arabic. Again, I'm not the only one who says this. There's a professor at Yale University by the name of Gerard Bruling, who basically says the same thing, that the so-called sources of Islam are so-called uh, you know Jewish and Christian apocryphal sources were available in Syriac, Aramaic, Hebrew, and Ethiopian. But the Prophet Muhammad didn't know any of those languages to begin with. So that refutes the idea that the Prophet Muhammad heard these stories and put them into the Quran, or passed them off as divine revelation in the Quran. So then, who was the teacher of the Prophet Muhammad? Again, even critics will say it's impossible to know who was teaching the Prophet Muhammad. It's impossible. Like, even they'll say that they don't know who was teaching the Prophet Muhammad. Even these atheist and Christian critics will say that they don't know for sure who was teaching the Prophet Muhammad. They'll say it's impossible to know how Prophet Muhammad was getting his information. So keep Occam's razor in mind here. The Quran says it's revealed by God, and since no human has been able to pinpoint the exact sources of the Prophet, where Prophet Muhammad was getting his information from, it's best to say it came from a divine source, because we can't trace the human source. We can't trace the human source to the Prophet Muhammad. So it's safe to say that the Quran actually is divine revelation from God Almighty. Again, read the Quran chapter 16, verse 105 to further establish my point. So again, this is just what I wanted to say about refuting the idea that Prophet Muhammad knowingly plagiarized the Quran off Jewish and Christian sources around this time. The fact that he only knew Arabic, and the fact that those sources were in Syriac, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Ethiopian, and the fact that Prophet Muhammad didn't know those languages, proves that he didn't plagiarize off the Jews and Christians of his time. Stay tuned, a lot more videos are up ahead. Oh, and I forgot to mention the source of the Jews only knowing Hebrew. That's a Sahih Bukhari hadith, and I'll post that hadith below, where the Jews knew Hebrew. Um, the Jews only knew Hebrew, so the Prophet Muhammad couldn't have plagiarized off him because he only knew Arabic. So again, I'll leave that hadith. I'll leave that hadith below. And not only that, but that hadith shows that Prophet Muhammad actually did not trust the Jewish sources, because he says, don't believe the Jews unless the Quran confirms what the Jews are saying. So the Prophet Muhammad himself had no faith, or he thought that the Jewish books were worthless anyway. So if the Prophet Muhammad thought the Jewish books were worthless unless they confirm what the Quran is saying, why would he copy off them? Why would he plagiarize them? It doesn't make any sense. It's like me plagiarizing off a paper that got an F. There's no point in doing that. If I want to plagiarize a paper, I'm going to plagiarize an A paper or a B paper. I'm not going to plagiarize an F paper. So Prophet Muhammad thought that the Jewish books were worthless. There were worthless information in them, except when those Jewish sources, agreed with the Quran. So he basically thought the Jewish sources were worthless, or they were garbage anyways. So again, I'll be posting that hadith below. So that shows that the Prophet Muhammad wasn't interested in plagiarizing off the Jews, because he didn't have a high opinion. He thought the Jewish sources were worthless anyways when it came to revelation. So again, I'll be leaving that hadith below. So this is just my 2 cents. This is just my 2 cents on this whole Muhammad plagiarizing off sources claim. stay tuned, a lot more videos on that. Thanks.